tragedy on American soil when sorghum fields turn into commodity graveyards. In just a few weeks, what was once expected to be a golden harvest has turned into a nightmare. Sorghum fields that once gleamed under the sun now lie still. Warehouses are overflowing, cargo ships are nowhere in sight, and the main export market has vanished without a trace. Behind the silence is a shockwave quietly tearing through American agriculture, a trade war that not only strikes at export value but also crushes trust, jobs, and the hopes of millions of farmers. American agriculture collapses, a calculated breakdown. A collapse not caused by nature, but by design. As of early May 2025, U.S. agricultural exports to China continue to nosedive. And this isn't just a random accident. Sorghum exports, a once strategic grain favored by China for liquor production and livestock feed, have plummeted by 95% compared to Q1 2024, falling to just 78,000 tons in Q1 2025. This marks the lowest level in over a decade, forcing many American farmers to stockpile inventory and sell off goods at prices below production cost. But it doesn't end there. Soybeans and pork, two pillars of U.S.-China agricultural trade, are also severely impacted. China abruptly canceled numerous soybean contracts, sending futures on the Chicago Board of Trade down over 14% in the first 3 months of the year. For producers, this is a double blow, losing export markets and getting squeezed on domestic prices. Pork exports are facing a similar fate. Once China's second-largest pork supplier, the U.S. has been sidelined as Beijing turns to Brazil and Europe amid food security efforts and trade tensions. According to the U.S. Meat Export Federation, farmers are now losing $8, $10 per pig in 2025, not including rising storage and shipping costs due to excess supply. American farmers are bleeding losses due to the collapse of the Chinese market. Is this a natural outcome or a policy-induced disaster? Share your thoughts below. Empty promises. What are farmers waiting for? As the crisis deepens, the federal government has yet to take any significant action. So far, U.S. farmers have only received moral support from senior officials. No concrete financial aid packages, no clear trade strategy to renegotiate with China or open new markets. Meanwhile, China has moved decisively, forming long-term stable trade ties with Brazil, Argentina, and even Russia. Nations now rising as direct competitors to American agriculture on the world stage. It's not just about sorghum. The entire global agri-trade map is being redrawn. What's frightening isn't only the rejection of sorghum, but a structural shift in global supply chains. China, once the largest buyer of U.S. soybeans, increased soybean imports from Brazil by 25% in Q1 2025, while U.S. soybean futures dropped over 14%, reflecting eroding confidence in American competitiveness. According to experts from Rabobank and Bloomberg, this is not a short-term disruption, but a long-term restructuring, a strategic pivot that China has been planning for years. Once these supply chains are redrawn, reversing them will be extremely difficult, if not impossible. China turns to South America. Amid unrelenting U.S.-China trade tensions, China is actively restructuring its agricultural supply chain, with South America as its strategic partner. Brazil, with its large-scale production and low costs, has overtaken the U.S. to become China's top soybean supplier, accounting for over 70% of the market share in early 2025. Argentina and Paraguay are also expanding their export capacity to meet Beijing's growing demand. This is no temporary shift. It's a long-term realignment, clearly demonstrated through new bilateral trade deals, Chinese-funded infrastructure projects at South American ports, and multi-year purchasing commitments from major agribusinesses. When the world's second-largest economy changes its key suppliers, the global trade map is forced to change with it. The U.S. government responds. Facing growing pressure from key farming states, the Trump administration is reportedly considering a new aid package, potentially reaching the $28 billion scale of the first term. But farming associations and trade groups have warned subsidies can't replace a lost market. Many farmers in Iowa, Nebraska, and Kentucky say current aid measures are merely keeping them afloat, not enough to invest, buy new equipment, or repay bank loans. Meanwhile, China is signing 5-10-year contracts with South American countries, leaving the U.S. increasingly disadvantaged at the negotiation table. Financial aid may help today, but it can't rescue a collapsing future. America is losing its soft power in global trade talks. Do you think we can still turn things around? Ripple effects across the economy. It's not just farmers. The entire agriculture-based economic ecosystem is shaking. Transportation industry. At ports like Los Angeles and Long Beach, agricultural shipment cancellations have surged to 20-30% weekly, severely impacting logistics and port revenue. Food processing sector. Soy oil plants, feed mills, and meat processors are running below capacity, leading to labor cuts. Agricultural machinery manufacturers, companies like John Deere and AGCO report plummeting orders, disrupting technical supply chains and parts production. The final consequence, a ripple effect across national GDP, threatening economic slowdown in farming states, which have long been the backbone of domestic growth and key battlegrounds in presidential elections. American agriculture is retreating from the global stage. Is it the inevitable outcome? Or a reversible mistake? What should the U.S. do before it's too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Shooting ourselves in the foot. How the Ships Act turned the Port of Oakland into a graveyard for American agriculture. Port of Oakland, a strategic gateway. Being strangled, the Port of Oakland is more than just a port. It's the lifeline for America's high-value agricultural exports, a hub for products that require refrigeration, industrial packaging, and day-precise logistics, from beef, dairy, and poultry to almonds, French fries, and processed foods. With an export-import ratio near 50/50, Oakland relies heavily on two-way cargo flow to stay efficient and keep logistics costs low. But ever since China, which accounts for 29% of the port's total trade, imposed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. agricultural goods, that flow has come to an abrupt halt. The result? Containers abandoned on the docks, shipments rejected mid-voyage, exporters stuck with full responsibility for warehousing, storage, and return shipping, costs so high that many must choose between selling at a loss or going bankrupt. The Ships Act, a self-inflicted policy trap. Just as U.S. exporters were struggling to recover from China's retaliatory tariffs and global supply chain disruptions, a second blow struck. The Ships Act, marketed as a tough measure to curb China's dominance in maritime transport. The law imposes over $500,000 in fees on any Chinese origin container ship docking at U.S. ports. The goal was to hit Chinese shipping giants operating across the Pacific. In practice, though, the law backfired badly. Critically, the Ships Act targets container vessels, but excludes bulk cargo, which is common for industrial raw materials but not for food or agricultural goods. Even worse, the law makes no exception for refrigerated containers carrying perishable foods, most of which are American agri-exports bound for Asia. So what does this mean? Low-margin goods like frozen meat, dairy, fruits, and vegetables, all reliant on refrigerated containers and timely delivery, are now bearing the brunt. Small and mid-sized exporters, who lack the leverage to negotiate with shipping giants or lock in long-term contracts, are seeing logistics costs skyrocket. For many, every shipment now starts in the red due to shipping expenses alone. According to USDA data, over 55% of total U.S. agri exports are shipped in containers. This means more than half of America's agricultural export industry faces the real risk of being cut off from international markets, especially in Asia, where U.S. beef, chicken, and dairy once thrived. The consequences are already visible. Many exporters in California and Washington have canceled international orders after container shipping costs tripled in just a few months. West Coast ports, once key gateways for containerized U.S. agri exports to Asia, are now reporting sharp drops in international volume. Meanwhile, ports in Canada and Mexico are seeing a surge as exporters reroute goods across the border to dodge the Ships Act. Peter Friedman, executive director of the Agriculture Transportation Coalition, AGTC, didn't hold back. This is policy suicide. In his words, the U.S. is shooting itself in the foot. We don't need China to retaliate. we're destroying our own farmers' global competitiveness all by ourselves. Global supply chains, not a light switch. Some policymakers in Washington still believe that renegotiation will bring China back, but that belief is overly simplistic, if not outright naive. In global trade, trust is built over years and can be lost in months of instability. A supply chain is not a switch you flip on and off. It's a complex ecosystem of long-term logistics contracts, warehousing networks, port infrastructure, capital flows, and most importantly, reliable partnerships. Once broken, by policy, tariffs, or political chaos, restoring it can't be done in a few months or with a handful of subsidies. Brazil is proof. In just 3 years, it ramped up soybean output, upgraded ports, and secured full state support. The result? Brazil has replaced the U.S. as China's top ag supplier. The market share America once held is slipping away, and Beijing now sees no reason to return to a partner perceived as unstable and politically erratic. Global trade is a long game, and if the U.S. doesn't change course, it's disqualifying itself from the race. What does the global market really want? Not just low prices, but stability. What international buyers demand isn't just low prices. They want reliable shipping schedules, policy consistency from year to year, supply chains that aren't disrupted by domestic politics. Right now, according to a Reuters survey of global traders, the biggest signal they receive from Washington is instability and lack of direction. The result? Not just lost orders today, but the looming threat of permanently losing America's place on the global ag export map. The collapse of American agriculture, market crisis, mounting losses, and fading trust. Bailouts can't restore market confidence. The White House recently announced a new $8.6 billion aid package to stem the rising tide of bankruptcies in the agricultural sector, particularly across the Midwest. But key agricultural organizations like the National Farmers Union and the American Soybean Association remain skeptical. They warn that one-off relief funds are merely temporary band-aids and cannot compensate for the loss of core export markets like China and Mexico. As the U.S. is pushed out of many global supply chains, ports such as New Orleans, Houston, and Oakland are operating below capacity, leaving agricultural goods stuck in warehouses. This creates a logistics bottleneck, increasing storage and preservation costs and shifting risk onto farmers. The industry, long dependent on long-term international contracts, is now facing not only a shortage of buyers, but also a collapse in market confidence. Farmers sowing in uncertainty and despair. Widespread uncertainty has left many farmers caught in a no-win situation. In Iowa, the so-called heart of the Corn Belt, farmers continue planting with a gambler's mindset, knowing that skipping the season could mean losing everything. Some report having to take out agricultural loans at interest rates as high as 9% due to the Federal Reserve's tight monetary policy. In Kentucky, many small-scale farms are considering skipping harvests altogether because labor and fuel costs now exceed projected sale prices. More concerning, a report by the Association of Equipment Manufacturers, AEM, shows that investment in new agricultural equipment has dropped 22% year over year, and a clear sign that fear is spreading. Despite repeated stimulus packages, the core demand from the industry remains unchanged. Reopen global markets, not wait for handouts like high-dose painkillers. From trade crisis to rare political backlash, what began as a trade dispute has evolved into a systemic crisis, triggering a rare political backlash. A bipartisan coalition in Congress is now pushing a bill to increase oversight of presidential powers related to tariffs. For the first time, the National Farmers Union is backing the Farm Fair Trade Act, which would require congressional approval for any trade action exceeding $1 billion. This shift signals just how severe the trade damage has become. Retaliatory tariffs from China and the EU have slashed soybean exports by over 40%, driving domestic prices down sharply. China, once the largest buyer of U.S. pork, canceled a 12,000-ton order, resulting in hundreds of millions in losses. Meanwhile, processors like Callum Foods and Archer Daniels Midland, ADM, are reporting massive profits, highlighting who is really winning in this tariff-driven landscape. Profits go to corporations. Farmers bear the losses. The wealth gap in U.S. agriculture is widening. According to the USDA, average income for small farms dropped nearly 18% in 2024, while agri-processing companies doubled their profits. Feed costs rose 25% due to import tariffs on raw materials from Canada and Argentina. Ironically, prices for meat, dairy, and grains on store shelves have skyrocketed. Yet the producers themselves have no say in pricing. The current supply chain system concentrates all power in the hands of a few corporations that control distribution, logistics, and retail. According to the Food Policy Institute, FPP, over 75% of U.S. food distribution is controlled by fewer than 10 companies. Meanwhile, farmers are forced to sell at wholesale prices just to clear stock and chai, locking them into long-term losses. The American agricultural model is collapsing from within. This crisis isn't just external, it's exposing deep internal flaws in the modern U.S. agricultural model. Heavy reliance on exports, synthetic fertilizers, imported fuel, and large-scale monoculture has made the system vulnerable to global disruptions. In April 2025 alone, over 68 agricultural shipments were canceled, leading to plant closures across Kansas, South Dakota, and Missouri. Rural banks are reporting the highest default rates in 12 years, and credit lines are tightening due to heightened risk. Experts are calling for a return to New Deal-era principles of production management and resource conservation, policies that once stabilized prices and built strategic reserves. A new study by the University of Missouri suggests that if the U.S. had maintained that model through 2020, the cost of supporting agriculture today would be at least 37% lower than the current bailout-heavy approach. As long as the U.S. clings to unilateral tariffs and short-term fixes, the future of American agriculture and its rural communities faces the threat of total collapse. The U.S. agricultural crisis is no longer a temporary shock. It's the result of prolonged policy failures. When markets are lost, supply chains break down, and trust collapses, no bailout is big enough to save the system. If America doesn't pivot fast, the fields that once symbolized prosperity may become nothing more than fading memories. What do you think the U.S. should do before it's too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more analysis on global economics, politics, and beyond.